The war that goes on within us is something we all have to deal with. So today, we're going to talk about how to deal with temptation. Hello everybody, this is Pastor Lyle and welcome to Daily Renewal. We're going to be starting a series today entitled Winning the War Within. And we'll be dealing with the subject of temptation. If you're new to our channel, I just want to encourage you to hit the subscribe button below, and that'll make available all the different videos that we have. We've got over 100 videos on various topics that we put together because I really believe that people that are hungry for God need answers to some of the questions about the Bible, about life. And so this will enable you to look at all the videos that we put together. I want to also encourage you to make comments and also smash that like button below. That also helps us distribute the videos. Okay, so in talking about temptation, it's really important that we understand some things about temptation. So this week we're going to be looking at some different aspects about it because temptation ultimately can destroy your life if you don't know how to deal with it. So we want to help you deal with that this week. So first off, let's deal with what temptation is. If you look at a dictionary definition of temptation, it says the temptation is to wish or do something that you know you should not do or have. Well, that's important to establish because ultimately when you look at temptation in terms with God, temptation isn't something that you will be tempted to do that is good. Temptation is always something that ends up being bad. In other words, you're never going to be tempted to worship God. You may be tempted to worship another God, but not the true God. Temptation will always be something that inside of you know is wrong, but you choose to do it. That's really important. So, the idea of temptation, before we go much further, we need to establish where it comes from. And this is a big deal because I know if you're anything like me, there was a time in my life where maybe I never really fully understood where temptation came from. So let's start off by taking a look in the book of James today. In the book of James, chapter 1, we see here in verse 13, it says this: "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone." So the first thing that we have to establish when it comes to temptation is that God will never tempt you. And remember, temptation is to do something that you know is wrong. So we need to see that God will never tempt you to do something that is wrong. There's no evil in him. You know, over the years that I've gone to church, I've heard some real strange stories about things that apparently God has told people to do. God is never going to tell somebody to walk into a church and murder someone. You know, there's many people that say they heard a voice from God saying that I needed to kill this person or kill that person. That is contrary to anything God has said in his word. He's not going to ask you, especially in the New Testament, where Jesus came to die for all. You know, he's not going to tell somebody. If people hear voices in their head and they try to excuse it away and say, well, God told me to kill people, that's not God. God will never tempt you to do something that ultimately is wrong. And we know that murder is wrong. There's many other things that we can look at today, and when it comes to temptation, that are prime examples that we know that they don't come from God. And the Bible confirms this by saying that God will not tempt you to do anything that is ultimately going to lead to evil. So the question would be, where does temptation come from? And in answering that, we will also begin to answer the question of the reason that temptation comes. So one of the best places that we can find that is in the book of Job. And in the book of Job, both in chapter 1 and chapter 2, we see this conversation that is going on between God and Satan. And God is talking to him, and he's relaying, and this story is relaying the story of a man named Job, who God looks at and sees him as an upright man, a man who fears God, a man who understands God for the most part, and is faithful to God. And Satan brings back the rebuttal of, well, of course he's faithful to you. It's because you put a hedge around him. You've protected him. And so God allows Satan to do some things in his life. After Satan, we see in verse 11 of chapter 1, says this. He says, but now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. We see in chapter 2 of Job as well, in another conversation, Satan says, but stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. We have to understand here that in the conversation that is happening here with God and Satan, Satan's conversation, or his side of it, is that if you don't treat him well, then I can tell you right now, this man will curse you to your face. Well, what does that mean? We have to understand that the reason why, first of all, the temptation that we have is by the enemy of God, a created being by God. We've done episodes on this before, that Satan was a fallen angel, and now he is doing everything he can. He has an amount of authority in this world, and he's jealous of man, which is God's greatest creation. Man was made in God's own image, and there's a jealousy that Satan has towards God's creation. And so now he's doing everything he has, and we see Job representing us as man's creation, that Satan is trying to create a separation between God and man. And that's what we see. This is the reason why the tempter, Satan, is trying to tempt man. We see that he's trying to create a separation between God and man. And we can also see a great example of this, if you want to look back on your own, into the book of Genesis, when he tempted Adam and Eve, when Satan tempted Adam and Eve in the garden. He tempted them in hopes that they would disobey God, and they did, and there was a separation that happened. And that separation, as a result of the separation by the first man and woman, as a result of that, now anybody that's born in that bloodline, which is everyone, is now born in sin. And we may cover that, if not today, maybe even later on. So this idea of creating separation between God and man is by the tempter Satan. It's his plan and purpose to cause this separation. And we see that again in Job. He's doing this thinking that if he can just get man to think that God doesn't care, man to think that God doesn't love him, that man will curse God to his face. So we have to understand that when we've got an enemy that has been studying not just you, but we have an enemy who has been observing generations of your family line and knows some of the weaknesses that are in your life. And his goal is to do everything he can to bring a separation between you and God. But the other thing you have to understand is that we also have a God that knows us better than we know ourselves as well, and even better than Satan knows us. For God to allow Job to go through this, he knew that Job had it in him to be able to pass the test of any temptation that Satan was willing to bring at him. And the Bible talks in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, it says this: no temptation has overtaken you except such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it. It is absolutely vital that we understand that the grace of God is sufficient. That word grace, if you haven't heard me say it before, it's the unmerited favor of God, the power of God that enables you to do what you cannot do in your own strength. When you've made a commitment to the Lord, then that power of God is available to you now to be able to go through anything in this life that our enemy would try to bring against us. There is no temptation that God hasn't already foreseen, and it says here that if we can just trust Him, if we lean upon Him, that we can go through any temptation that comes our way, and God will make a way of escape for us. But we have to embrace that by faith. So you might be saying to yourself, why would God allow us to go through some of these things? And you know, if you're anything like me, there's trials that I've had that I look at and I go, you know, God, why would you allow me to go through this? This is excruciatingly painful. And you know, as you look around, as I look around, I look at other people, some of the things that go on in their lives that I look and I go, wow, I don't understand why God would allow that to happen. And we're going to cover some of that in some of the future episodes within this week. So I encourage you, if you think you're going through temptations that you just, your mind is blown away why God would even allow this in your life, I'm going to tell you that God has a reason for allowing some of these things to happen. But we need to establish today that God is not the one who is tempting you, but He can use these temptations, and there's a reason that they happen, and ultimately it's because He loves you that He allows them to happen. But for today, what we want to embrace is understanding that number one, we have an enemy, and number two, the reason temptation comes is because that enemy, his goal is to try to bring separation between you and the God that loves you. And the first step of our plan is to understand that and take the stand to say, you know what? I get it, and I'm not going to allow separation to come between me and God. Well, I hope you got something out of that today. Tune in tomorrow because we're going to continue to talk about how to get through temptation and why it happens, and you're going to learn some great stuff this week. I want to encourage you once again, if you enjoy these videos, share them with as many people as you can. Hit the like button below and feel free to consider subscribing to our channel. You can also like us on Facebook, and we're on Twitter and Instagram as well. And also, I want to encourage you, if you're in the Kamloops area, maybe you're not going to church anywhere, I want to encourage you, come by River City Church. We would love to have you. Having said that, God bless you, and have a great day.